I had the unique experience to interview one of New York's first ever clinical nutritionists, Dr. Biamonte, and he shared with us not only what is the best diet that we should follow for optimal health, not only the correct supplements that we might consider taking, especially as somebody living with type 1 diabetes like myself, which vitamins you should add to your breakfast routine, right? But also covered different aspects of our life that are literally poisoning us without us knowing it, and how to identify these symptoms in our life in order to live a long and healthy life in general, but also how this might apply to somebody with diabetes. Now, if you don't know who I am, my name's Matt Van de Vecht. I am a certified master fitness trainer and nutritionist, and having this discussion, nutritionist to nutritionist, was truly fascinating. And if I'm being honest, eye-opening for me as well. So I live with type 1 diabetes, so the interview does have a skew towards how does this apply to those of us living with diabetes as well. I truly hope that you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed making this content. It was truly an honor to chat with Dr. Biamonte, and the discussion that we had was also initially meant for my clients. We did a private interview with them. They got to add in their questions at the end, and you'll hear me reference the questions that they added in. But I wanted to share this with you in hopes that this blesses you with some ideas, sparks some thoughts, and gives you some insight in how you might improve your own life. Now, this interview obviously was Dr. Biamonte sharing his thoughts, of which I may or may not agree with directly. These are his thoughts, but I think that this is incredible information for us all to consider as we approach our own health management. So we'll get into our theme song, and then I'll hop straight into the interview. Well, welcome to the Pardon My Pancreas podcast. I am thrilled to bring you guys a new guest today. We've got on with us Michael Biamonte. Now, I've got this incredible bio that is impressive, to say the least. It's a paragraph of just amazing achievements. So I'm going to read that off so everybody has a little bit of backstory on you. So Michael Biamonte is the founder of the Biamonte Center for Clinical Nutrition. He's a co-creator of Biocybernetics, which is an unprecedented computer software program that is able to study blood work, mineral tests, and many other lab tests to determine exactly where your body is imbalanced. Initially was designed for aerospace purposes. Now, as a practitioner for over 30 years, he is dedicated to improving the lives of his patients, helping them get back to living, holds a doctorate in naturopathy, and is a New York State certified clinical nutritionist. He's a professional member of the International and American Association of Clinical Nutritionists, the American College of Nutrition, and is a member of the Scientific Advisory Board for the Clinical Nutrition Certification Board, and is listed in the Directory of Distinguished Americans for his research in nutrition and physiology. I noticed there's like a bit of a theme there.
Yeah, that's true. There is.
And I'm really excited about that. So thanks so much for coming on, Dr. Biamonte.
My pleasure.
To have you here. So I'd love to give the people a bit of the backstory from you. How did you get into nutrition and all these different certifications and studies?
I was around in the early 80s. And in the early 80s, this is where a lot of the organizations we have now were formed. So I got in on the ground floor in the IAACN and a lot of the other organizations. I'm on the board of nutritionists where we actually write the tests questions that the nutritionists have to answer in order to get certified in whatever state they're in. And this was all because I was one of the original nutritionists certified in New York State, probably one of the first 10.
Oh, wow.
That was certified and licensed in New York State. So I think being around that long has helped this. I've gotten to know a lot of people, and like I said, wasn't on the ground floor. And those days were quite different than things are now. Now you have most colleges offer degrees in nutrition and functional medicine. And back then we were fighting to stay alive. We had what we called at that time the dietitian wars. There was literally a war between the clinical nutritionists like myself who practice functional medicine and the dietitians who staff the hospitals. They wanted the term clinical nutrition exclusively to themselves. They wanted to be called clinical nutritionists and not dietitians. Most likely because they had muddied the term dietitian so much, because when you think of a dietitian, what do you think of? You think of Jell-O, right? You think of hospital food, institutional food. That's what they're associated with. So because of that, they wanted to take the term that the title dietitian, clinical nutritionist away from anybody
Hmm.
who was trying to use it who wasn't a dietitian, a board certified dietitian. And that was really interesting because they would constantly have these meetings up in Albany, New York, that they kept secret. And they met with a bunch of politicians and they were trying to get a bill passed that was basically going to say they were the only ones who could use the title, and anyone else who used the title, that was illegal and you can't do that. So we would find out at the last minute whenever they had these meetings, because we had people up there that were, let's say, sympathetic to our cause.
Yeah.
They would tell us the night before, and we would rush up there in the morning, and we would prepare, various speeches where we would explain our side of the story. And
Hmm.
eventually, this got to the then Governor Cuomo, the original Cuomo, not the son, but
Yeah.
the original Governor Cuomo. He looked at this and he said, "Well, these are two different disciplines."
Hmm.
Because we need dietitians because they are in charge of buying food and making up the menus in a hospital, so you can't not have that. But he said, but these other nutritionists here have a very valuable service. These people are more like medical doctor nutritionists, so to speak. That was the first anybody got into the idea of functional medicine back then. So he said we have to have both disciplines. He ended the war. He
Hmm.
said there's got to be both disciplines, but what we have to do is on the certification that we give a dietitian, it's going to say D. And on the certification that we give the clinical nutritionist, it's going to say C. And that's how we differentiate them. And that's what made the peace eventually. That was the end. That was the end of that. The wars were over. Now, if the dietitians had gotten their way back then, you wouldn't have clinical nutrition courses and functional medicine courses because they even wanted to make it illegal for a chiropractor to give nutritional advice.
Oh, wow.
They wanted to be no one in a health food store could give nutritional advice. No one, an acupuncturist, acupressure, whatever, an OMD, doctor of Oriental medicine couldn't. It was only a dietitian who could. So they were really trying to come up with quite a monopoly. And luckily, Governor Cuomo was the one who stopped them.
Well, and as I'm sure the wars have changed over the years, right? I'm really curious to hear about your thoughts on nutritional standards over the years. Like I've seen eggs flip-flop. They're good, they're bad, they're good, they're bad over the years.
The funny thing is like when you look deep enough into these things, you always find vested interests.
Yeah,
That's
very true.
been I always look at who signs the check, where's the money going to? If you go
Absolutely.
back to the Framingham study, the Framingham study was the one that made cholesterol, made eggs bad.
Uh,
So this took place in Framingham, I think it's Framingham, Connecticut. They took a whole town of people and they gave them this powdered egg mixture to drink for X amount of months. And
mhm.
then they watched their cholesterol levels and watched their disease rates and whatnot. And they concluded at the end of the Framingham study that cholesterol was bad for your heart. This is the original study. Everything is based on the Framingham study.
Oh,
Now, what we found out years later, which is interesting, is that the powdered mixture they gave people was not really egg, it was synthetic.
oh, jeez.
And since we've investigated what they gave the people, we found that an elephant couldn't break down this egg powder they gave them.
Hmm.
You could not break down your body cannot emulsify this form of cholesterol that was in there. So this study was flawed, is totally flawed. It should be thrown out completely. But still, people reference that study.
Yeah, well, and it's hard too when you've got these biases that you've grown up with to challenge them, right? You're
Yeah,
like, I've always known that this one thing is bad for me, and you
right.
presented with a different study or opinion. It's tough to
Yeah, you've got to
reach
look
that.
at number one, who paid for the study.
Uh-huh.
The old story, whoever pays the piper calls the tune. You have to look at that. And then the more time that passes, the more data comes out. And then eventually the more truth comes out.
Yeah.
That's got to happen, especially with the internet. You can't hide things anymore. That's how the COVID vaccine became so controversial. There's too many people having side effects. They all got on the internet. They don't care what Joe Biden says, that it's safe
Right.
or they don't want to hear that. They want to know about their symptoms, and they're going online and telling people about it. And eventually, lots of people start to know these things. When it comes to food, you have to differentiate nowadays because food has become so commercial. Like if you look at the what's the name of the food? Food Inc. There's two versions of Food Inc. of that movie. I don't know if you ever heard of the movie.
I've heard of it, haven't seen it.
Food Inc. Is all about modern food and how it gets processed and
Ah,
developed.
oh no.
And they show you the real deal. There's another book that relates to this, which is called Animal Factory, which goes in there and shows you what the real deal is. But after you've been privy to seeing some of these shows, you have to start asking your question: is there a difference between different ways food is produced? And does that almost make them different foods unto themselves? So
Right.
when you look at eggs commercially made, compared to eggs that are organic, non-GMO. They're laid by chickens. They're basically free range, right? When you look at the omega-6 and the omega-9 factors in those eggs, you find that they're much higher than your supermarket egg. When you compare a supermarket egg to these organic eggs you get in the health food store, and the organic egg in the health food store is practically like taking a fish oil capsule compared to the supermarket egg.
Yeah.
When you look at beef is one of the biggest examples. Red meat, which is grass fed, non GMO, organic, is almost a completely different food than the commercial red meat that you buy in the supermarket. And if somebody really wants to get an actual mass on what I'm talking about, get two frying pans, two hamburgers. Get one hamburger that's just an average run of the mill hamburger. Get another hamburger that's grass fed. Cook them both on the pan and now clean the pans and watch what happens when you go to clean the pan. You're going to see that the grass fed burger cleans very easily.
Hmm.
It just wipes right off, and the other one can be more stubborn and have more of a low viscosity fat. And that's because that's exactly what you're dealing with. When you have a grass fed burger, you're dealing with fat content, which is very high viscosity. And that's the better type of fat. That's like the high density HDL that you hear about when you do your blood test.
Right.
So the grass fed burger is like the high density fat. The average burger is the low density fat. And how easily both of these things clean mirrors what's happening in your bloodstream when those fats get in there. The high density fat just moves right through. It doesn't get stuck. It doesn't cause clots. It doesn't block your arteries, but the other one will because it's a stagnant fat. It's a low density stagnant fat. So it's going to sit there and build up.
That's very interesting. I think a great point too to be made where if you want to eat healthy but don't feel motivated, at the very least you could say, well, it's easier to clean up. So maybe
This is
that will
true.
motivate you.
This
Uh,
is true.
but the quality of foods, a very important discussion. And then of course, preparation styles, even something like a chicken breast, if you boil it versus roast it versus grill it, right?
Hmm.
Very different in how it responds in our body. So you mentioned something though, the fish oil pill versus supermarket eggs. I'd love to hear your thoughts on supplements versus whole foods and where that discussion leads.
It's a very good question. It's one that's been around for quite some time, since the health food industry began. If you look at the definition of supplement, a supplement is to be added to, not in place of.
Ah, fantastic.
Some people have a confusion on that. They think that if they take their protein powders and all their superfoods and all the different pills, they don't need to eat food. Not how your body works. So a supplement is made to be added to your diet, which is what the word supplement means,
Hmm.
as opposed to replacing. And there have been numerous studies over the years, going back to 1930, which have shown depletion in the soil of trace minerals and a lot of nutrients. And it actually it's impossible to have your vitamin and mineral levels all in a normal range without taking supplements. I've tried it. I've had many people try it. It's impossible. You can't do it. You have to take supplements. It's just not in the food anymore. Even if you go to the best health food store in the world, it's still just not there or consistently enough to keep your levels at a uh, in a normal parameter. And
Hmm.
I can say this with total confidence because I've tested people for the last 40 years, tested all their nutrient levels, not just blood tests, but tissue tests,
Ah,
actually seeing the tissue level of your nutrients. And I can absolutely say equivocally that you cannot keep your nutrient levels up where they need to be without taking supplements. We could argue that's the soil. We could argue that. We could argue it's also the way food is produced, if we want to quote Food Inc. and David Kirby's book, Animal Factory. But the other problem you have is pollution. The amount of pollutants that we have nowadays is unprecedented, and your body needs that much more in terms of antioxidant and detoxification capabilities to handle those pollutants. So I would say even if the soil was tremendously abundant, even if everybody was eating all organic and it was all the best food you could imagine, I would think you probably still would need supplements just to combat the pollution.
This is a fantastic segue, because I think that just the general toxicity that surrounds us in our system is just unprecedented, right? It's growing and it's terrifying at the same time. The things we put in our mouth are killing us. The environment's killing us. So when looking at these tests that you've run over, you said the last 40 years, I'm curious if there are any maybe general deficiencies you've seen across the board.
Yeah, the two biggest that are the most consistent are magnesium and B complex. And second to those, we have selenium and zinc and copper. Second, and that's keeping within the framework of most of your essential elements. Not getting if we get into the quasi essential elements like lithium and rubidium and ones like that, that gets a little funky. But in terms of the basic elements, that's what we've seen over the years. It's been pretty consistent. And if you follow this, you will also see the news media will actually tell you and reinforce some of these things if you're hip to interpreting what's going on. In Japan, for quite a while in Japan, they had very high levels of stomach cancer. And someone went and analyzed their food and found out their food was grossly deficient in selenium, which prevents stomach cancer. A couple of years ago, there was a shortage on turkeys during Thanksgiving. And the reason why is all these turkeys had aneurysms and died. Well, why did that happen? It's because they changed the turkey feed and there was less copper in the turkey feed. So all these turkeys became copper deficient. Copper deficiency will give you an aneurysm, and boom, there you go.
Wow.
So the more you follow what's in the news, you can pull it back to understanding this if you just research it a little bit. But those, what I would say the biggest would be B complex and magnesium. There are so many things that deplete magnesium. When you have stress, your stress hormones elevate, that depletes magnesium. When you eat sugar, that depletes magnesium because of how it affects the insulin regulation. When you drink alcohol, you lose magnesium in your urine. So magnesium is probably one of the most easily perishable elements that's really essential. And when you look at all the illnesses that magnesium deficiency is involved with, it's becomes staggering after a while. The most obvious is cardiovascular problems with low magnesium.
Well, and even within magnesium as a topic itself, I've seen a lot of different headlines talking about being very picky about the type of magnesium, the sourcing, of course, as well. But magnesium glycinate comes to mind as one of the top headlines I've seen. How important is that?
Well, I'll hear from a lot of patients. They'll tell me that they're taking magnesium already, and I ask them what they're taking, and they tell me I'm taking magnesium oxide. And my response to that is, well, that's a laxative. That's really not magnesium that's going to get into your body and do what it's supposed to do. The chelated magnesium is your first, let's say, peer. And then above chelated magnesium, you could look at magnesium citrate or glycinate. The top earner is going to be magnesium orotate. Orotates are very special forms of minerals that were discovered in Germany. And orotic acid is the amino acid that the magnesium or the mineral is bound to. Orotic acid enters your body through the pentose pathway, which is a carbohydrate pathway. So where most minerals are trying to enter your body through the protein cycles, this is completely not true with an orotate. An orotate's going through your carbohydrate metabolism, and that's much easier for you to absorb. Carbohydrates are easier to absorb than protein, so it makes that a better, easier form. They're very expensive, but it does make it an easier form.
Interesting. And where in this discussion does something like bioavailability come into play, or for supplements in general?
I think it becomes individual because the supplement is the supplement, and you can get some predictability, like I said before, where magnesium oxide is more of a laxative, but it's the person's own ability to absorb. It's their hydrochloric acid levels, it's their digestive capacity that's going to give you more data on bio. I mean, you can buy really cheap stuff in the drugstore or in Walgreens, really cheap garbage that's not going to get absorbed because it's just so cheap that it has so many fillers and binders in there that you can't absorb it. But
Right.
assuming you have a decent product, a lot of it is going to be up to your own body's ability to digest and absorb.
And how would you go about finding a decent product to know that it's not some trash from the gas station?
Most of the stuff in the health food store, if a person goes to a reputable health store or a vitamin shop or any of those types of stores, most of that is very reputable.
Ah,
Of
okay.
course, any supplements which are made for doctors or the quote doctor line products, which are there are quite a few supplement companies that cater to doctors, and those are usually 99% of the time quite good quality, and they do what they're supposed to do. So that's a given. But if I would say go to a health food store, something like the Vitamin Shop, any of those stores, you'll get decent products.
That is good to know. Yeah, the lack of regulation in the supplement industry has me worried sometimes by just the lack of control on what ingredients go in there. You mentioned fillers and binders, right?
There's two viewpoints on that. You
Mm.
you get overregulation, which creates a problem, and underregulations. Now, on the side of underregulation in this country, Chinese herbal products that have been made that were imported sometimes from the Orient were loaded with toxic metals. And so sort of a lot of the big companies that now make Chinese medicines, they all separated themselves out from the cheap companies that were making these products loaded with toxic metals. And that was due to lack of regulation. They weren't testing them, they just were letting it go. On the side of overregulation, this is one of the mechanisms that the FDA, well, let me put it this way. This is one of the mechanisms that the AMA, via the FDA, tries to use to come down on supplement companies
Uh,
because the AMA is constantly worried about people taking supplements rather than drugs, and they will use the FDA as sort of a Nazi organization to go after the supplement companies and overregulate them to the point where they'll want so many ridiculous things done to show you that each lot is correct, that
mhm.
it costs these companies so much money, they end up having to fire people and cut down on their staff, and that's the point of overregulation. So we've got it both ways.
Yep, that makes total sense. If you're healing through supplements, you won't be taking drugs later. So,
Yeah.
yikes.
And
There's a
and that's
lot
the
of,
worst thing, in medical school, there's a saying that we always get, you never kill the patient. Very important that you don't do anything to kill the patient, because if you kill the patient, you don't have a patient anymore.
yeah.
But then you never cure the patient either. Never kill him, never cure him. Because if you look at orthodox medicine, allopathic medicine, the way it's set up, and this is something patients constantly ask me, and the only way I can answer this is if you just look at how it's set up financially. Allopathic medicine is not intended on curing anything. They're not looking for a cure for anything. They say they are. You see these commercials of this cancer institute is trying to find the cure of cancer. What causes cancer? We know what causes cancer. You would have to be an idiot nowadays not to know what causes cancer. There's a whole list of things. You can go on the FDA's website and look, and there you can find a list. There's over 100 different things that are known to cause cancer. So it's not, we don't have to find what causes cancer. We know what causes cancer. It's avoiding what causes cancer. That's the
Mhm.
tough part sometimes. But things are not set up. They're not looking for cures. That's not how they're oriented. They're looking for medicines that control your symptoms so that you're a lifelong consumer. That's really what we've got. That's with the exception of surgery and emergency interventions, which we're great at in terms of handling chronic illness. It's not, they don't want to handle chronic illness. They want to have a drug that's going to handle your symptoms that you keep coming back to buy. That's why they hate people like me. Because when I was in school, we were taught to look for cause. We were taught to look for the cause of the problem, and the cause is usually going to be a toxicity or a deficiency. And when you find the cause and you fix it, then that's usually the end of the ball game. The person doesn't have to keep coming back to buy the drug. And who would blame the person when you watch these commercials on TV for these drugs? I mean, man, my God, listen to these side effects.
Right.
Your nose can grow 3 feet tall. Your penis can fall off. You can become insane. You can become an aggressive undresser. All these insane things Who would want to take half of these medications? And the funny thing to me is when you listen to the commercials for SSRIs, they talk about how you can have suicidal thoughts, you can become depressed. Well, that's why you're taking the person is taking the medication because they're worried about having suicidal thoughts. They're worried that they're depressed. So they're going to take the medication and get the exact symptom.
Right. Or get it worse.
Or get it worse. It doesn't make sense unless you really understand how SSRIs work. Then it makes sense.
Well, and on the, you mentioned deficiencies and toxicities, right? That's the root cause we're looking for oftentimes. You mentioned these blood labs you've been running for 40 years. How do you, I would say, run an appropriate test? Like, do you have to get a full panel of every possible thing? Is there segments that are more important than others? How would somebody start that journey?
Well, generally you want to get a full panel, but it's not always the full panel that you're thinking it is. Looking for levels of vitamins and minerals in someone's blood is a waste of time. First of all, minerals don't test well in the blood because minerals are constantly being moved around. Blood doesn't show you storage of minerals. You can have low potassium, go eat a banana, and 20 minutes later your blood's going to show your potassium's high. So that's not a valid test. The valid tests for minerals would be a tissue test, which would be hair, fingernails, something like that. That's a tissue, like a biopsy of the liver. The liver material actually shows you the correct levels of those minerals stored in the liver. If you do a hair mineral analysis, which is getting more and more popular nowadays, that gives you a good idea of the minerals stored throughout your body, because that's a tissue. Tissue equals storage. Blood equals transportation. Urine equals excretion. So for each of these different samples, you're looking at different things. I constantly hear from medical doctors, well, hair analysis doesn't match the blood. Well, it's not supposed to. It's two different things. Hair is showing you the minerals you're storing. The blood is showing you minerals that you're transporting. So it's not going to match up together. It shouldn't. It would be incorrect. But in terms of looking at vitamin levels in your blood, that also is a waste of time because it's really not showing you your utilization of the vitamin. When you can interpret, and this is what we did back for the space program in the early 80s, when you have a blood test and you know how to interpret the blood test in terms of its physiology, you have a better idea of how those nutrients are functioning. As an example, a typical blood chemistry, alkaline phosphatase. Alkaline phosphatase is thought of as being an enzyme that elevates in children because their bones are forming. It can elevate in certain cancers. They don't really think much of it, what it means when it's low. Well, alkaline phosphatase is a zinc-activated enzyme. So when you look at someone's alkaline phosphatase level, you're basically looking at their zinc, the activity of zinc in their body. So if this is the type of data, you can take a standard blood test, but if you can interpret it correctly, calcium, for example, serum calcium, when you look at it, you're looking to a large degree at your fatty acid function because it's fatty acids that transport calcium across your cell membranes. So when you look at a blood test from that viewpoint, you're getting more of a functional look. But there also are other blood tests you can do nowadays which are purely functional, where they won't get into a level of a vitamin because it can be very misleading if you don't know how to interpret it. Like as an example, for years, we were fascinated by people who had high levels of B12 in their blood, and yet they weren't taking B12 supplements. It was this mystery everybody was dying to solve. And finally, someone did it last year. So, and there are many people listening right now who might have had this or know somebody who's not taking B12 and their B12 levels are always high. What's wrong with those people is they have a problem with vitamin B2, which is riboflavin. It was discovered that vitamin B2 assists your body in utilizing B12. And if you don't have enough B2, your B12 levels are unutilized and therefore they're just jacked up high in your blood.
See, I love this discussion because it's correlation versus causation, right? Mm-hmm. Finding the root cause of why did that happen. When identifying these trends, I mean, it's clear that, you know your stuff. I know that doctors I've seen in the past do not. They look at the symptoms, right? Surface level things. So how can you find someone that you can trust to interpret these correctly?
Usually you want to find a doctor who's referred to as a functional medical doctor. Typically, if he's a functional medical doctor or if you find a clinical nutritionist, the clinical nutritionist came before the functional medical doctors, and most of the teachers that the functional medical doctors have been clinical nutritionists. We were the founders of that area. So, but if you find somebody who's in that field, functional medicine or clinical nutrition, a CCN, we call them, those are people who can interpret these tests correctly. And those are the type of people you can go to. And if you say, I want a nutritional workup, I want to know what I should take, what I shouldn't take, what I should eat, what I shouldn't eat, those are the people who can tell you.
Now that you mentioned that, this spurs on another question for me. Is there something to be said about blood-based diet choices or any kind of genetic testing to figure out which diet is best for you?
Yeah, you're really asking the wrong person because when I was in school, when I was in college, my professor was Dr. Diadamo Sr. He is the author and the discoverer of the blood type diet.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm very biased
Okay.
because of that. So I would have to say yes, but I would say that it's not 100% perfect as a system, but there's enough truth there to use it as a foundation for whatever for a program.
Well, within that, you mentioned bias. I know we all have biases of our own, and to some degree. Do
Mm.
you have a favorite generalized approach to diet as far as recommendations? You'd say, I don't know you, but just start here.
Sure. What's your blood type? And what's your blood type?
I believe I'm B positive. I have to
So
double check on that.
if you're B positive, the diet that works best for you is Mediterranean diet.
I just got back from Greece.
There it is. So it's going to be a Mediterranean diet. It's a lot of fish, a lot of vegetables. There's a certain amount of legumes, a lot of oil, olive oil, that whole certain amount of dairy. But there's certain exact foods which are more emphasized, and that's all covered in the book. Eat right for your blood type.
So it's not just a generic less sugar. It really is, in your opinion, tied to blood type as
We can step back and we can say generic. As far as generic goes, the better diet is going to be eating organic food
Mhm.
as best you can find organic. Definitely, you want to stay the hell away from GMO foods, and that's pretty easy to do in Europe now. A lot of countries in Europe have banned GMO foods, so you want to stay away from GMO. You want to eat organic, and you want to try to stay away from the inner aisles in the supermarket and try to buy more on the outer aisles because that's where your produce is and real food is. Try to stay away from packaged food as much as you can.
That's a
That
tough
would be
one.
the most generic answer. The next step after that is find out your blood type, buy the book, use the book to assemble your diet. And it's basically the type B is more Mediterranean. The type O, the original blood type on this planet, is a carnivore. He's more the hunter gatherer. You've heard hunter gatherer diets, paleo diets, all this.
Mhm.
That's all the blood type O. And then the blood type A tends to be much more of a vegetarian. Blood type A's originally were the farmers. The original farmers on this planet were blood type A's. So they ate much more grain, where type O's don't really need grain.
It's certainly worth an experiment. I think it's worth trying out, seeing how I feel. I told my wife I actually did feel better in Greece when I was eating all the Greek food. So
That's funny.
maybe it's worth looking into a little deeper. On that topic, though, sort of, a little bit of a tangent, gut microbiome certainly plays a role for a lot of people in which foods work for them and how we process these nutrients. What are your thoughts on where we're at now with the gut microbiome research and how can we encourage a healthy microbiome?
I think we're doing really well. As you know, that's my specialty is the microbiome, and I think we're doing pretty well as far as the research goes into that. There have been a lot of advances in stool tests that use DNA technology to more accurately define someone's biome. There are certain drawbacks with stool tests where stool tests are deficient in being able to find parasites and Candida albicans or any strain of Candida or fungus for that matter. It's because of it's the nature of the testing medium. Stool is not like urine or blood, which is more liquid and therefore more homogeneous. Its constituents tend to be more evenly mixed in blood and urine, where with stool, that's not true because stool is more, if you want to call it mostly solid mush. It doesn't tend to lend itself very well to culturing certain organisms or
Mm.
finding certain organisms like parasites and candida, because parasites and candida inhabit the intestinal tract in a uniform fashion. They tend to be in certain areas. So that's the drawback with stool as far as that goes. Other than that, in terms of all the other biome there, we're doing very well in terms of being able to identify it.
So with microbiome, then I know you talk a bit about that in your book, The Candida Chronicles. Would love to know your thoughts on a generic approach first, on how people can give their body the best chance to develop more of a balanced microbiome.
Well, many times, and this holds true for subject matters like the microbiome, even way up to thyroid problems. It's not always what you add or what you take, it's what you avoid and stay away from that can help you more than you might think.
Hmm.
And one of the biggest problems that people have with microbiome is taking things that destroy the biome.
Uh,
And there are certain key things that do that. And of course, they happen to be pharmaceuticals because things like candida or dysbiosis are largely iatrogenic. They're doctor induced caused by pharmaceuticals. So when someone abuses antibiotics, they're going to wipe out their biome. They can be eating all the fermented foods in the world that they want to eat, but if they keep taking antibiotics, they just keep killing their biome. First is be aware of things you do that kill your biome. Excess alcohol consumption, antibiotics. There are many drugs, many hormones that will stimulate the growth of dysbiotic organisms because those hormones stimulate the growth of things. Like there's estriol, which is the female hormone that stimulates your fetus, the baby to grow. It also stimulates candida to grow if you have too much estriol. So sometimes it's more what you want to stay away from than what you do that helps.
So we talk about hormone disruptors and these different environmental pieces that come into the puzzle as well. Is there a general list that comes to mind as far as the most disruptive?
Plastic.
Oh no. That's everywhere.
Yeah. Why do you think we're in the shape we're in? Plastics are very estrogenic. Plastics and other chemicals in the environment mimic estrogen. And that's probably the number one problem in terms of we refer to them as xenobiotics. That's an environmental toxins that you get. There are many toxins in the environment that do all kinds of things, but if we're going to look at what the biggest group are, it's the phytoestrogen group, which we were told at one time that phytoestrogens from soy and from different things were good for us. And that's until we found out most of the soy was GMO, had thyroid inhibiting chemicals in there. So that's not true anymore. That's the downfall to being a vegetarian. Vegetarians who lean a lot on soy, very typical in terms of illnesses they develop. They get all kinds of bad PMS. If it's a woman, if it's a man, he develops low estrogen. They develop candida. They are very estrogen dominant. They have loss of muscle mass. They have low thyroid, low body temperatures. It's just very predictable what happens when you consume too much soy. It is the estrogens from plants and primarily plastics in the environment that cause most of the toxicity we hit up against. Forget about mining and all those things. Those are more isolated. Straight across the board, plastics are very toxic to people. Of course, it depends on where you live, though. So now if you live in the Southwest, an inherent problem you're going to have is uranium. I can't tell you how many patients we get. We almost can look at their mineral tests and sometimes know where they live based on the minerals that are in their environment. And uranium is a common toxic metal, which you'll find throughout the Southwest, and that's primarily because of nuclear testing. There are certain states like New Hampshire, where there is a lot of uranium mining, so you can get uranium that way. But in the Southwest of the United States, there was so much nuclear testing that it's very common you find anybody who lives there with elevated uranium. And elevated uranium is called DU. It stands for depleted uranium. It's no longer radioactive, but uranium, even inertly, has toxicity that it has. So that's not a good thing either. More across the board, I'd have to say it's plastics. And when you then look at this from the viewpoint of a challenge, an environmental challenge on people. Let's say we're living 200 years ago. People are walking around minding their own business, right? Well, you don't have the exposure of the toxicity. You don't have the amalgam dental fillings that are mercury based. You didn't have vaccines that have thimerosal, which is the mercury preservative. So you don't have all those things. So people's ability to detoxify was literally going unchallenged back in those days. You didn't have people who I consider what I do, clinical ecology is the type of medicine I practice. It's clinical ecology. And we didn't have people being challenged back then. See, we've all heard of someone who's a bad methylator or a bad detoxifier or some such thing. This is one of the ways that, from a physiological standpoint, nowadays we identify autistic children. The one thing that we know physiologically about all kids with autism is that they're really bad detoxifiers. They have a whole list of genes, and you can go on the internet and read about this. There's a whole list of genes that these kids have that make them bad detoxifiers. And that's how they get autism, is because the autism is an expression of their nervous system being toxic with environmental toxins that they can't handle, so it affects their nervous system.
Wow.
And we didn't have that. The kids with those gene patterns 200 years ago weren't challenged by these things. They didn't have a dentist putting mercury in their mouth. They weren't getting vaccines with mercury. They weren't surrounded by plastics. So their detoxification abilities weren't being challenged.
Well, you mentioned the detoxification. I know that plastic has been a big discussion for a long time, especially microplastics in our water, like the amount inside of our bodies already. Is there a way for us to begin that detoxification process?
It's rough. I tell you what, we try to get bottled water that's only in glass in the house, the big 5-gallon jugs.
Yeah.
And sometimes they go on back order. My wife jokes, she says 2/3 of the planet is water. How can they tell us that this is on back order? But it's you got to do the best you can to avoid these things, and it's not convenient. The way big food is all set up is not in your favor to do these things easily.
So the first step then is avoidance, avoiding plastics.
Try to avoid as much as you can.
And then obviously we've got decades of interactions and consumption of plastics. So is there research being done on how to pull that out of our body, or is that just kind of something we accept and try to be better from now on with?
Well, there was research done back in the 50s on how to reverse a lot of the toxicity and a lot of the even radiation that you come in contact with. There is a book you can probably find, I would imagine, in most bookstores. It's called Pure Mind, Pure Body. And it explains a detoxification program that uses dry heat sauna and specific nutrients that allow your body to release the toxins from your stored fat cells. One of the major nutrients is niacin that you take. And niacin helps your cells release radiation, but niacin also helps bleed out toxins that are stored in your fat cells while you're doing the dry heat sauna. And it's it's Clear Mind, Clear Body is the name of the book. The author of the book is L. Ron Hubbard, the same man who wrote Dianetics. He did that research in the 50s, and you can go and do that program if you go to a Dianetic center. They have the program there for you to do. And people have raved about it. That I know is a workable program. There are some medical doctors in Canada who are doing a version of this kind of program. And I think there are some doctors scattered around the country who are doing versions of it. It was written up in some of the scientific journals, and I think they just called it the Hubbard method when they wrote it up. But essentially, it's a detox program. These are the attributes of it. It's a detox program that uses dry heat sauna, and it uses niacin as a therapeutic nutrient to draw the toxins out of your body. There are other nutrients that you use also, but it's primarily niacin is the most active to draw the toxins out. And I would imagine there are a lot of doctors who have some version of this that they're doing, but that's where the original data comes from.
Very interesting. My wife came across the niacin and began using that as well. So I guess dry sauna is the next step for us.
Yeah. Also, you may want to get the book. The book describes how to go through the whole program. Clear Mind, Clear Body.
Clear mind, clear body. Well, and speaking of books, I'd love to dive into yours briefly before we wrap up today. We do have a few of my clients actually in the chat, so I wanted to let them know they can add questions on stuff that I might have missed because they have great questions. We do have one already from one of them says, what are doctors' thoughts on diabetics and or insulin resistant folks taking berberine?
Berberine is interesting because berberine is also antimicrobial. So there's somewhat of a question as to, does berberine help lower your blood sugar because it's killing off some pathogen in your system because it's antimicrobial, or it doesn't mimic insulin? I would have to say probably it's because it's mimicking insulin. But there are lots of products out there now that help to lower your blood sugar that have berberine in there. Berberine and cinnamon and fenugreek are the nutrients of the month, so to speak, that have been found to help you lower your blood sugar. And of course, the plant-based insulin is another thing that people would look at. But it's totally accepted nowadays. If the question is, what do doctors think about it? Well, it's totally accepted, and you're seeing berberine in more and more formulations that control blood sugar.
A lot. Yeah, I've seen that as well. And cinnamon gets a bad rap. People make fun of it because a lot of us are told, just take cinnamon and you're cured. But For what it's worth, cinnamon is actually beneficial, right? And
Yeah, especially from Ceylon. If you get cinnamon specifically, it's from Ceylon. It appears to have the biggest effect. But cinnamon, fenugreek, and berberine, those three elements, those are the ones you want to look for as far as the herbs in a product. The product also should have chromium and vanadium, the glucose tolerance factor. I would say that's a good product if you find one has chromium, vanadium, cinnamon, fenugreek, and berberine. That would be a very good product.
oh, we got another question here. What about, oh, yeah, what about chromium and glucoberry supplements? So you added chromium in your own thoughts, but have you heard of glucoberry?
Yeah, and I would say go back again. Chromium is really important because chromium is one of the receptors for insulin. We all know that hormones have receptor sites, and that's where the hormone enters to do its thing.
Mhm.
And chromium happens to be the receptor for insulin. So chromium is super important. If you don't have enough chromium, it doesn't make any difference whether you're making insulin or not. You're not really going to utilize it. And vanadium also helps your body metabolize insulin. So those are very important nutrients. But again, the theme should be that the person wants to get tested to find out if he needs these things. We had a patient once who worked in a junkyard. My colleague said, well, this guy has hypoglycemia, and I think we should put him on chromium. So I said, let's wait
Oh,
until his
no.
test comes in. So the test comes in, and this man had chromium. His chromium was like 50 times. He was chromium toxic. So it's a good idea to test before you take these things.
Absolutely. And I think that it's important to recognize too that it's not just deficiencies to worry about, but having too much of a good thing is also a bad thing, right? If you're taking
Yeah.
too much supplements. And so,
And that's an imbalance, and you don't know. We could talk about that for an entire session, because originally, when I was in school, that was one of the things I was studying was interreactions between nutrients and how
mm,
taking too much of one nutrient imbalances another. And I can
oh
tell you
wow,
that in the shtick from the health food store, that you don't have to worry about taking supplements because they're water soluble, or if your body
right.
doesn't need it, it just comes out of your body. Yeah, it's true. It just comes out of your body, but what it drags with it
Mm,
is a whole list of other nutrients and causes an imbalance. So, as an
interesting.
example, if you take too much vitamin C, you can cause a copper deficiency. If you take
Ah,
too much zinc, you can cause a copper deficiency. All right. If you take too much manganese, you can cause a zinc deficiency. If you take too much vitamin D, you can cause a magnesium deficiency. I could go on and on and on all day explaining how if you take too much of one nutrient, you can cause or deplete another.
so it's not just a matter of slapping on more band-aids, more pills, but to find the actual balancing point for your
Yeah,
body.
and that makes a huge difference. One
I,
of my first patients was a medical doctor when I first got out of school. He
oh
was
wow.
referred to me by a chiropractor. And this medical doctor had this history of prostate problems.
Hmm.
And the medical doctor read in the literature that zinc was really good to help your prostate. So he started taking zinc, and within 3 months, his prostate problem totally cleared up.
Oh wow.
Being a medical doctor, he continued to only take the zinc every day by itself and didn't investigate anything else. So 3 years after taking the zinc, his prostate problem started to come back. And he's saying to himself, I don't know why this is happening. I've been taking the zinc. I'll double the zinc. So now he
Oh
raises
no.
his zinc from 50 to 100, and the prostate went wild. That's the point when the chiropractor said, go see this nutritionist and maybe he can figure this out. So when the man came in and told me the story, I said, immediately you have to stop taking zinc and you have to start taking copper. He called me back in a week and he said, well, I did what you said and the prostate infection's gone. Now I'm only taking the copper. I'm not taking the zinc. His tests come in and his test showed he was actually now zinc toxic and he had taken so much zinc that he had caused a massive copper deficiency.
Jeez.
Copper is the element in your body that controls bacterial infections. Your thymus gland mobilizes copper to literally electrocute bacteria, and that's how your body kills these organisms. So he had caused so much of a deficiency of copper in his body that his prostate developed an infection.
This is the kind of stuff that fascinates me is the chain of events, right? Where what actually is happening behind the scenes.
Mhm.
I love that. We have another question from one of my clients. What is the test for chromium? How would you test that?
The best test for chromium is to do a hair mineral test.
Hmm.
And you can get that done by doctor's data, analytical research labs, or my favorite lab is Trace Elements Incorporated. Those are the three big ones in the US that do hair mineral studies, because those are the guys who have been researching what the mineral levels and ratios in the hair mean. So they have a tremendous amount of data in terms of associating a mineral deficiency with a disease or an illness or a symptom. They have all the data locked up.
Very good to know. And they're widespread across the U.S.
Yeah, they service everything. This, yeah, they're doctors. I know Trace Elements is in Texas. Doctors Data is in, I believe, Illinois, but no, Chicago. But you can find them easy if you just go online, search for them.
I've got two questions left on my list I think it'd be fun to ask. One, you mentioned books, and those are ones that I'm going to check out. But I know you have a book, and I would
Mhm.
love to hear your maybe favorite golden nugget from that book.
My book is called The Candida Chronicles.
Mhm.
And the reason I call it the Chronicles is because it chronicled my journey through understanding Candida. Because when I first heard about Candida, I didn't know what it was. I had no clue. I was so stupid when I had my first patients that had Candida. I was so stupid, I told them to go to their medical doctors and get treated and then come back to me. And the book literally takes you through how I discovered my protocol for Candida, which is very, very famous. And any person suffering from Candida, if they read my book, it's going to be a constant oh my God, oh wow moment, because they're going to see everything they've been doing wrong
Hmm.
and why the Candida won't go away and why it keeps coming back.
Wow.
So I can't say that I have one nugget from the book because it's the concept of the fact that the book unravels the mystery of Candida and why Candida continually comes back and relapses in people. It's all in the book why it happens and what you're doing wrong that allows that.
Well, I love that answer too because it seems to be on point with this entire conversation, which is there are no quick fixes if you don't fix the root cause.
Yeah,
Right?
that's
You have to
problem.
fix it before trying to just slap something on top and hoping it works. So, yeah, that's beautiful. And that falls back into supplements, to diet, and now to candida. And yes, with your book, The Candida Chronicles, that's something that I'm going to look into. My wife's actually been talking about the topic of candida for a while, and I saw your book come up on our interview list, and I thought I'd love to have a chat with him. So I'm glad we had a chance to chat today. Before we jump off, though, obviously people can go find your book, The Candida Chronicles. Where's the best place to find your book? Where can they find more information about you?
Me, they can look up online. They can find my three websites. My one website is health-truth.com. That's the main website. I have another website that's the New York City Candida Doctor, and then the New York City Thyroid Doctor. Now, Candida and thyroid are very related, which is why I have those two websites. Candida is very involved in thyroid problems and vice versa. So that's why that exists. The book they can find on Amazon, just like everything else in the world.
Yeah.
It's there.
And if somebody were to look into working with you, what would you say your specialty is? What do people come to you for?
90% of the people who come to me due to some type of candida related or dysbiosis or SIBO, parasites, something along that line. Used to be that's quite different. It used to be 30 years ago when I was first practicing, people came to me because they wanted to be on the correct nutrient program. They wanted to know what diet. It was more personalized nutrition. What vitamins should I take? What shouldn't I take? What diet should I do? What should I do? And that's changed now. It's changed in out of necessity due to the fact you have about 30% of the population that has candida doesn't know it, and candida produces maybe up to 150 different symptoms that people would never you would never think you'd never figure you'd never because candida can produce digestive symptoms. It can produce asthma. Now who would think your digestive system has anything to do with your asthma?
Right.
Candida can produce rashes and it can cause prostate problems. Now, who would ever think your rash has anything to do with your prostate problems? And, we can keep going on with all these symptoms. But typically, when a person develops candida, the first thing that happens is they are tired, fatigued, they've developed brain fog. Then they start noticing they're gassy and bloaty and they're reacting to foods they never reacted to before. Then they may start having rashes. Then they start having chemical sensitivities where they can't be around cigarette smoke. They can't leave their house anymore because the fumes outside just drive them crazy. So when you look at that, that's usually the first group of symptoms that people go through, including estrogen dominance if you're a woman and low thyroid. when you look at that, a person is not going to put that together. As these symptoms evolve, they're not going to say, well, gee, now I have this, now I have this. I wonder if it's related. That doesn't happen. So that's how Candida became a specialty.
Yeah, it sounds like a very complex and interwoven topic that would be difficult for the average person to interpret. So I'm glad that people like you exist to tie all the pieces together. All right. Well, anything that you feel is important to mention before we wrap up? Anything that I missed?
No, I think you did a very good job. Very good job.
Awesome. Well, I've had a pleasure chatting with you. I want to say thank you to Amy and Rob for adding some great questions as well. But thank you so much for taking the time out to share your knowledge with our audience, with the world, and your book as well. I'm excited to have a look at that, the Candida Chronicles. So yeah, I appreciate your time, Dr. Biamonte, and I'll make sure everybody gets access to your links, and we'll put that in the description as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Everyone, thanks for watching. We'll catch you guys in the next episode, and keep up the fight.